They may be watching you, but I'm watching them. This is Gabriel Custodiet. Just to let you know that the episode you're about to listen to is going to be great, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. If you're new to privacy or looking for a clear vision of next steps, start by going to escapethetechnocracy.com. All our cutting-edge analysis about escaping the surveillance grid occurs exclusively on our paid newsletter, Watchman's Torch, and in our world-class video tutorials. This podcast is just a preview. This is not some game for us. We live this stuff and we consult on it. Your support means we have no sponsors and can speak the unmitigated truth as we see it on this show. Check out the show notes and escapethetechnocracy.com. I'm very pleased to be joined by a repeat guest. I think this is the fourth time that Max Tannahill has been on the show. Max is one of the few people that I'd be interested to talk about Bitcoin with. So Max, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Very good and really nice to be back again. And quite honoured to be a repeat guest. But no, certainly good fun to be chatting again. And I think this time under hopefully kind of some more optimistic circumstances and some interesting stuff to talk about in the space now.
Just a thought for the listeners, if you're absolutely new to these topics, we're going to kind of jump into the deep end with a lot of these. So I have an entire list on YouTube, an entire list of Bitcoin topics. We're not going to start from ground zero or step one or something like this. Also, you can go to Escape the Technocracy, check out the Bitcoin sovereignty course. That will certainly get you running. That's kind of a easy step for people to take. So, Max, let's start with the most important news in Bitcoin. It's not the price. It's not whatever nonsense events going on. What's the update on our friends Samourai Wallet, who are essentially political prisoners for upsetting some of the status quo in the United States?
Yeah. So like obviously just for the listeners here, like it's not like I'm kind of under any particular kind of I'm getting any kind of detail that anyone else can't get publicly. Right. But obviously I do follow the kind of case and try and kind of keep in touch. And certainly one of the guys that I'm in touch with recently highlighted that there'd been an update on the indictment. So these kind of documents that you can find at that courtlistener.com website. Some further detail was added, a few more pages, and I think an additional charge was added to the guy's indictment. So there was a kind of a request recently, I think, for the case to be dismissed. It was rejected, and unfortunately as well, there were some amicus briefs as well that were to be submitted, and rather confusingly, the judge hasn't admitted those. So quite a few disappointing things in that space. So it does look very much like now we'll be heading to seeing a trial. I think towards the end of the year, with the most recent date that I have being in November. I don't know kind of that reliability of that date. I have seen kind of in the past on this, and certainly I'm kind of not familiar with the US legal system at all. Some of these dates do move, and I think for anyone that is interested, do keep a track of certain kind of accounts. Like there's a freesamurai.com website. I'd always recommend as well following an account called Econo Alchemist. He did a really good thread recently on some of those charges that were added and some of the additional detail in the indictment. I think they've included some extra text messages and things like that were sent to try and kind of allege certain kind of conspiracy charges on the two guys that are under indictment. Again, very little of any kind of substance that's really kind of coming through. And also, I think kind of worth kind of keeping at the moment, being aware of at the moment, is that in a related but not the same case at all, but on the Ethereum side, Roman Storm will be kind of coming up for trial fairly soon. I don't know the actual date, but relating to him writing the smart contract code and being part of the team that wrote Tornado Cash. So a lot of kind of similarities there. They are quite different technologies with the way that they are actually operated, but kind of similar things here where you've got developers that are being charged with money laundering crimes for actually, just writing code, releasing it, and in some cases, actually kind of, operating a server that didn't actually take custody of folks' funds at all, and couldn't be kind of money laundering by any kind of definition of the word that we've been used to, and even has been the advice from kind of organizations such as FinCEN. In terms of kind of the additional charge, it's an odd one. It's about conspiracy to distribute and possess with intent controlled substances. So that's an odd one. I really don't understand that. I think presumably that comes about because people that use the wallet potentially distributed materials that they shouldn't have done, and somehow they're trying to kind of wrap the Samourai team with that charge, which is very bizarre. And also in kind of some of the documents there, kind of actually rather kind of surprising to me is seeing some of the messages between some of the users and others where they're trying to kind of allege conspiracy. Actually, kind of one particular one, I'll just be straight up, actually included messages that even I'd sent to the team there, which is kind of rather amusing to see, because for me it seems like a very desperate move to kind of highlight that, particularly around kind of disappointment that more high profile users weren't using Samourai. As for kind of my opinion on that, it'd be the same as like seeing a good cafe that your friends operate, right, and seeing wealthy people that you might suspect of not having of maybe being criminals or whatever, but being disappointed they're going to the crap restaurant down the road rather than the decent cuisine that your friends are. And this kind of idea as well that Samourai could have actually kind of blocked users using a protocol that was completely kind of peer-to-peer and didn't involve actually kind of controlling those funds and never taking custody. Kind of is really quite laughable if it wasn't so tragic for the guys being there. So again, like nothing really new, and there's certainly kind of nothing here that I would say changes the kind of the nature of the charges. It doesn't look like they're softening at all, and nothing here, at least from my kind of non-legal minded perspective, that makes it a more convincing case or kind of shows to me and you like the observers here, the team, in any kind of different light than they were before.
Well, I appreciate you summarizing that, Max. And we're recording this on July 4th, which is so-called Independence Day in the United States. And, it just kind of emphasizes that these two developers were doing something that is very much in alignment with American values. They were just trying to help to make Bitcoin more private. And we hope that people will, yes, certainly I'll leave the links for people to donate to their cause. They will continue to need funding and such. And also and this is free, spread the word, help the word get around, make this the number one conversation in Bitcoin. Get this onto the desks of the populist politicians who are in the forefront of running the United States at the moment. That could be powerful. So let's do all these things and try to make this the main conversation in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I couldn't reiterate that more myself. The amicus briefs that can't be kind of admitted to the trial, I don't know if you'd call it that as evidence, or at least kind of a supporting document, which would have really helped educate the jurors, I think. Those are really worth spreading around. And actually, to be honest, I mean, they're genuinely well written and interesting written pieces. They're not low-level technical. They actually do explain how the protocol worked. And I think they're really important for everyone to understand as well, because I think something that people haven't really appreciated too much. And I think that the Bitcoin, and I'll also mention the Ethereum community as well. The Ethereum community has been a lot better than the Bitcoin community, but I still would say both are in a kind of a full sense of security whilst these trials haven't happened yet. And that's because is the kind of the legal precedent that's being kind of pushed here by the DOJ, particularly the SDNY, with this prosecution. Like, it really is a lot greater than privacy preserving transactions, which shouldn't be a controversial issue in itself, but could quite easily be applied to mining in Bitcoin, to operating a validator in Ethereum, or even running any other kind of smart contract. I think it would potentially make me nervous if I was operating a Lightning service of some sort, or even operating any kind of multi-sig or multi-party computation arrangement in Bitcoin. So it is really, really kind of important stuff. Very good documents. And the other kind of crazy thing as well is that the other thing that kind of came out in the indictment as well is repetition of just straight falsehoods about the team and the way that the technology works as well. I'm certainly would expect to see language being used in a way to paint them in a bad light. You expect a prosecutor to do that because they're obviously making a case, but there are just some things that are just straight wrong, and they've been wrong on since the beginning. Like a really kind of straightforward one to understand that is actually so crucially wrong is when they actually talk about things like the kind of this coordinator that Samourai were running. They talk about like I actually had to find in the original the DOJ announcement when they'd actually arrested the team. They actually described it as what was it? Just trying to look through now. It was Samourai operates a centralized server that, among other things, supervises and facilitates. I'm not going to
Uh,
talk about that. Not going to talk about those words, but they're doing a lot of work there. But it says transactions between Samourai users and creates new BTC addresses used during the transactions. I mean, for anyone that did use Whirlpool or has actually used any kind of Bitcoin wallet, particularly in Bitcoin, like you cannot rely on another service creating an address for you. Your Bitcoin, your Samourai wallet wouldn't, it doesn't really store the Bitcoin for you. It's a key manager, and you generate those keys, and you can store them in the form of 12 words and a passphrase. You can store them in a program, but ultimately you're generating those addresses, which are kind of better thought of as invoices, and you are making those payments as an individual yourself, and you're generating the invoices to receive those payments. And Samourai were like not doing anything there to actually do that. I actually suspect that's come about because that's probably closer to the way I suspect Ethereum did work. But again, like on the Ethereum side, you can have software that works quite differently, but has a similar non-custodial element towards it. So for example, in Ethereum, you can generate like something like a forward contract address. I don't know if this actually did operate in Tornado Cash, but theoretically, let's say it did. You could have something that someone else produces as an address, but can maybe has strict contract conditions where it can only go to like another address that maybe is that user's own address or something like that. And these kind of things, operate in a very kind of enterprise aspect to Ethereum, and very similar things operate in Bitcoin as well, which are really important to for users to understand what risks that they have, and for entities that provide these services to be very clear on what they're doing. So the DOJ getting this kind of stuff wrong is really, really I mean, it's beyond the point of incompetence now. You've got to look at it as actually being willfully misrepresenting stuff. So very frustrating to see that, and like that language has kind of continued on right to the latest update to the indictment, to kind of the original announcement for the I think the U.S. Attorney General's made, which of course they added a disclaimer at the end after all this strong wording saying, of course, every fact described here should be treated as an allegation, even though, of course, even with that disclaimer, it's still not good enough because they didn't state facts. They actually stated things that were incorrect.
yeah, that's very interesting and a little bit disturbing. So we'll keep the battle going here, keep people aware in the broader community. And especially if you're an American, make sure that the people that need to hear about this, get this onto, Trump's desk. That would be a big goal, just like the push for Ross Ulbricht. On that topic, Samourai Wallet gets taken down. Ashigaru Wallet, a fork of Samourai, crops up. There's some big developments in Ashigaru Wallet since we last talked. Could you tell us about your updated thoughts on it and what you think of their new Whirlpool that they have decided to start doing?
I mean, I think like I got kind of two main thoughts here. I'm trying to think, when we last spoke, now I might feel a bit kind of guilty for kind of doubting, but like I think either it would be you or someone else I've spoken to. I was a bit concerned that maybe the team had, tailored off with some of their efforts. And I think, I did re-listen to the podcast that they did a few months ago, and they kind of suggested that they couldn't do all the work that Samourai had done, and we were hoping other teams could kind of take up some of that mantle, such as bringing back OXT and some of the other services that Samourai provided, because it wasn't just like wallet and private transaction services. There was like a really kind of excellent public block explorer and all that. And so I kind of was thinking that they were really only just going to be focusing on like the actual mobile wallet. And so they've kind of been a bit quiet for the last few months. And then, yes, suddenly there's been a new coordinator server that they've released the code to. and are operating, and a new application that I say a new one. It's been forked, it would appear, from Sparrow Wallet, but will not be familiar to regular users of Sparrow Wallet because it's using what's kind of called a terminal user interface. So looks a bit technical to use, but is actually pretty straightforward because you don't actually have to really type anything into it. You can like use arrows and cursors rather to kind of move around. So it's fairly straightforward, just like kind of quite lo-fi, if that could be the word used, in terms of kind of bells, whistles to kind of see on an application. So yeah, huge move. I think when I said there's like two things that kind of really struck me here. I mean, like number one, obviously, I'm super happy to see the tech come back. It's been a bit of a frustration for me that we didn't see it. A sooner release of this software, but I think possibly now people appreciate that it wasn't a straightforward thing to do. I mean, I actually had a look at their Gatia, so that's like their code repository. Actually, I should probably count this. I think there's like 10 repos or something that are related to. I mean, I don't know what each one of them does and all that, but there's basically like 10 repos of code that they've kind of published. And to be honest, I'd actually kind of forgotten that Samourai had all of this. I mean, I don't really criticize Samourai for much, but I will say I never understood their fucking GitHub. It was always a bit messy to me. I apologize if any of them are listening now, but like I never liked it. But like you can actually see when you look at the Ashigaru one, there's quite a lot of repos. So it's obviously quite a big effort to launch this software. It's not really comparable, I would guess, to releasing like the server side code, like the coordinated code that we've seen on some of these other CoinJoin implementations, such as like Wabi-Sabi and Wasabi, which I've always thought are kind of very inferior. But I think I certainly hadn't really appreciated how much work probably was involved in getting this release. So yeah, super happy that it's back out there. That Bitcoiners are going to actually have some method of getting actual forward privacy on Bitcoin. But like actually the other thing that I would say I'm kind of as excited about is I'm just kind of happy to see that this tech is like up and running just purely actually from an activist point of view. And what I mean by that is like obviously I'm happy that the Ashigaru team launched this and put this out there. But you know what? I'd have actually been fine if they actually only launched a testnet. Well, not strictly, because obviously I do want this tech to be able to use myself and it's useful. But from an activist point of view, right? If this trial goes ahead in a few months, I think it's a very, very powerful demonstration of the fact that this isn't some kind of conspiracy that was done by a small team of people that look like some kind of money laundering thing or anything like that. This is simply server-side code that anyone can run. And from anywhere. We have no idea where the team is based. It's obviously sitting exclusively on Tor, a technology that is censorship resistant, and you don't, unless you've got kind of very good surveillance capabilities, have any idea of where it would actually be. What they've shown here is that actually anyone, obviously I say anyone, there's a disclaimer here, anyone that is capable of doing it and has the will to do it. But the point is that anyone can do this. And this isn't something particularly like that's kind of some single organizational thing. And so anyone can do this. Is one, it makes the point of punishing the Samourai team, I think in the eyes of the law, like a lot less point to doing it, because now the code's out there and being written and can be deployed by anyone. What's kind of really the point of punishing the guys that have written it and done it, unless you're going to keep on trying to apply that to every other team that runs it? And I think there's a diminishing set of returns if that's going to be your approach. And we've seen that with a lot of emerging technologies, over many years. And I would talk, right down to things such as the printing press, being similar types of technology that governments have been hostile to initially, and then had to just appreciate that it's ubiquitous and can be used by anyone. But also the other thing here is that from a trial perspective, now, I've not been in the US trial before, but when you're arguing over technical things such as Bitcoin, which are quite hard to kind of like visualize and imagine, I think this is fantastic because like, even if you don't use the production, and say that there is a testnet server I've seen that they're running as well. I actually haven't used the testnet, but I'm assuming it can be run. And I think Catan did a video on that testnet. you can actually bring to life the protocol that is being described and being portrayed by the prosecution in this incredibly unfavorable light. And even going back to my point like earlier about this kind of willful misrepresentation of the way that the protocol worked, where Samourai were like assigning addresses for users. Like if you can actually demonstrate, hey, here's an application I just run on my phone. Here's the funds that only I can control. Here's the addresses that I generate in a local. You can actually demonstrate in a court whether this would be possible or not and could be submitted. But either way, that an average user, an average kind of individual can actually really see this technology because it's not just being taken down and can actually have it brought to life and actually see, oh, actually, yeah, I can see that this is literally just passing messages, that this is all this thing is. And I think that by bringing that protocol back and having it operational, it is a very, very important kind of not just a message that this technology can't be put down, but it's also a very good demonstration of what it is. Because when it's all written in a kind of a set of tweets, when it's written in ways that describe anonymizing stuff, it can be sensationalized. And I think that's really what the DOJ have done. And I think now that we've got this kind of protocol that's been brought by a set of anonymous devs back, you've now got something that hopefully demonstrates to anyone like that it's really, it is. Sure, it's clever tech and all that, but it's not really any different from operating like, say, a server for a private messenger, such as like a Matrix or a Signal or something like that.
I think those are great points. And trying to tamp down software and people running it kind of is the big message here. It really is ridiculous, really is silly. And people who are going to do bad things, they'll always have tools to do so. They'll always find a way to do so. And the slowing down of that kind of bad activity, that's a different question altogether. That is not in the purview of these persecutions of people who are helping or who are developing software. Broadening the conversation a little bit here, Max, just to broader Bitcoin topics. Bitcoin knots is still very much in the news.
Yeah, so I try and keep this as neutral as possible in the way I describe Bitcoin knots, and I've certainly got a kind of an opinion on it, but I'll try and summarize it in a way I think that the enthusiasts would be happy as well. But Bitcoin knots is seen as another implementation of Bitcoin, or rather Bitcoin Core specifically, which is not a is a big difference from the original Satoshi client that came out, but is a continuation of that project. So it's a combination of like a wallet, but predominantly it's a node, and so it actually does kind of enforce consensus and operates as for your ability to broadcast and receive messages and validate and verify the transactions and store a copy of the local blockchain. Although Knots is another implementation of Bitcoin Core, it really is pretty much the same as Bitcoin Core in terms of the vast quantity of the code base. So I see it as very different to, say, something like a Libit coin, which Eric Voskuil, I think Amir Taaki had been involved in writing a bit, but Voskuil, I think, is the lead maintainer of that now, which is written in another language, has its own implementation of consensus rules. Other projects such as Bcoin, which I don't even know if is still being supported now, but that was like a whole Bitcoin Core implementation written in Java. And I think there's like a potentially even a Rust one. Again, like off the top of my head, I can't remember them all. But Knots is really just core, but forked. And it's particularly got like a set of additions to it that is really from just a single maintainer, Luke Dash Jr., who, for anyone that's listening, may also be confused, has also contributed enormously to Bitcoin Core itself and is part of that project as well. So it's not like it's even so much like two hugely different teams. You have one guy that's been in the Bitcoin space since the beginning, pretty much, has been a huge kind of contributor to Bitcoin, has been quite a controversial contributor to Bitcoin over the years, for reasons I kind of won't go into now because there's other podcasts that probably talk about that. But while he's still contributing to Bitcoin Core, maintains his other version that's got certain kind of differences. So there's I believe, kind of pretty much force. I had to be careful what I'm saying. I don't want to misrepresent, but at least is a lot more aggressive with core and keeping up to date on the version. So that's a kind of a bit of a difference there. And most famously will be known for having more aggressive filtering policies. And all that really applies to is a set of non-consensus rules, but these are what dictates what the Bitcoin node is even aware of in terms of the transactions that get propagated. So, for example, if you have a certain field in Bitcoin that still matches consensus and can be populated with information that is written to the blockchain. If Knots doesn't want to kind of look at that transaction because they're not interested in it, they won't even allow it into their own copy of their own local mempool. But it'll still get written to the blockchain, but they won't receive or broadcast transactions that they don't approve of. And to kind of very loosely summarize that debate, that's because particularly Luke Dash Jr., the maintainer, sees certain transactions as spam, doesn't want to kind of have Bitcoin actually processing them, and would like them to not be on the chain. But of course, the actual core, the Knots client can't actually stop these transactions being written to the chain because they are consensus valid. So once they are confirmed by other nodes, or rather confirmed once a miner has included them in a block, they're still going to get written to that chain. So really, like, the only kind of effect when you run, at least as a user, if you notice when you run Knots, is that you may actually be able to be unable to broadcast certain transactions. So, like, while we're talking about Ashigaru and Samourai, for example, if you were to do a BIP47 transaction and for establishing a payment channel between you and another NIM, or you're to do that staging transaction for a Whirlpool CoinJoin, they actually include information that Knots nodes users don't agree should be even in Bitcoin, even though they've been, this has been something that's been in case for at least 10 years or so. And so if you're a user using this node to back up your wallet, you might find that it wouldn't broadcast transactions that your wallet had created. You can, of course, still, even with Knots, is actually amend those filters to kind of not be in line with what Luke Dash Jr. defaults, but you'd have to know what you're doing there. And of course, you're probably going to find that aside from just a handful of transactions with Ashigaru and Samourai that really are not going to be kind of a large set of transactions in the network at the moment, like the really big players are the kind of, in terms of use of the network now, has been kind of ordinals users, stamps users, BRC20 kind of tokens and things like that. You're going to find that your node is not even going to see those transactions. So you'll actually get, if you're using that node to transact on, there's a good chance that your own fee estimation is going to be inaccurate because your mempool that you'll create won't even be aware of the transactions that other miners are going to be looking at and prioritizing. So you're potentially going to find that you're going to kind of create a transaction that you think is going to mean it's going to get confirmed quickly, and then find actually like no miner's interested in it because they've got another set of transactions that you may consider spam, but they don't, and then they're going to kind of work to include that in the block. So that's kind of like the very high level kind of description between the two. There's really not an awful lot of difference actually in terms of the implementations. I think there's a lot of unfortunate framing from people, particularly I would say on the Knots side, who like to say that Knots is kind of a quite decentralized project and it has lots of maintainers, but it doesn't. It's got the core work and all the work that's gone in there, but if you have a project and one guy forks it, you don't automatically inherit all the decentralization and all that. And this is a piece of software that you're downloading from one individual who hasn't really been that great in terms of his own operational security and securing his own servers and keys, and who's also got a history of being making fairly unilateral decisions and putting things in that have censored transactions before. So from those perspectives, whilst I'm not, and as any of your listeners, if they've actually listened to some of my previous episodes from you, they certainly won't find me a big fan of the Bitcoin Core team. I've certainly got my own criticisms of them, but it certainly doesn't make me kind of go, oh, well, I would run Knots instead. I'm personally quite happy to run Core. I do think the Bitcoin Core team do a good job in keeping that maintained and stable. I've not been happy with a lot of the work that they haven't done, rather than actually particularly the work they have done. But they are it's a very talented set of guys, and I think it's unfortunate the type of marketing and just social media kind of brigading that's been going on, like a very kind of effective like weaponization of probably some of the most ignorant and low IQ people in the space that are looking for a reason to feel important about Bitcoin and wanting to feel like they've got more ownership over and more influence over these kind of consensus rules than they ever have. This kind of weaponization, and it's very unfortunate to see, and it gives for a lot of people, I think they've got this misleading idea that the Knots movement, which is has been heavily supported by Ocean Mining as well, that Luke Dash Jr. is the CTO for, like, is a lot more powerful than it is when actually it's just, it's a set of very minor businesses and pretty irrelevant individuals that are running the software. And I use running even in quotation marks because I don't actually believe they're really transacting that much.
Now we're awakening the beast here. Let's keep going then. So actually, my next question was going to be, Max, we last talked around early May. Who do you think has been the worst person for Bitcoin since the last time we talked?
Yeah, maybe I'll do a bit more of a controversial one then. Let's have fun with this rather than kind of use the standard names. Say even someone like a Jack Dorsey. What a guy! I mean, he's a major investor in Ocean. He's had the opportunity right from the beginning to kind of have an influence on that team and tone down the censorship of what they've been pushing for. When I mentioned about the censorship of the BIP47 transactions and the Whirlpool transactions. Obviously, these are a tiny segment of the Bitcoin transactions being processed now. But a couple of years ago, at least 18 months ago, I think, these transactions were a lot more. They were kind of that much more critical. You had a kind of enormous anon-set that Samourai were kind of useful for. And, Ocean were kind of already mounting then a real kind of campaign there and calling anything that kind of didn't fit their very narrow sense of the term a spam. And I think the reason I'm particularly frustrated with Dorsey is that he's financed these guys. He as an individual is hard to kind of find where on the fence he sits. I think he's incredibly dangerous as an individual because he seems to convince a number of people just through platitudes that he's got the cypherpunk ethos and that he believes in free software and all that and decentralization. And so you've got all that marketing and all that brand power that he's got, an enormous influence. But you've got an Ocean as a mining company isn't meaningfully decentralizing Bitcoin mining in any kind of way. It's actually actively censoring, and he actually provides a kind of pleasant face for that. And I think you got to look at that as really sinister, because this is the same guy that somehow kind of has Bitcoiners still being quite enthusiastic after he kind of presided over Twitter at its absolute worst in terms of censorship of individuals. I mean, a big reason that Twitter is as crap as it is now isn't just because Elon's screwing up the algo and monetizing it in a way that, we've got people just advertising shit from the subcontinent. You can't get any debates like you can. But a lot of the interesting people were taken off in the first place during COVID because of the rampant censorship that's going on under Dorsey and, of course, under the guy that he put in his place to run as CEO afterwards. I find it hard to kind of put someone like Luke Dash Jr. as like the really big bad guy here, just because like Luke's his own worst enemy. I mean, you've got to be like mad or really like really socially awkward and not understand kind of things to look at someone like a Luke and be like, oh yeah, he's going to be a reasonable guy. The statements he makes, the way he's operated, the way you can't even like argue, he's kind of constant use of liar and then liberally blocking people for kind of any kind of attempt to engage any kind of debate or anything like that. I mean, like, this is not a reasonable man by any kind of definition. And like, there's obviously plenty of stories, and I won't go into them now, of kind of the extreme kind of takes and actions that he's had before. But yeah, Dorsey's the sinister one in my opinion, because he comes across as normal to a lot of people. But it is kind of probably kind of the worst thing going on at the moment. And I think it is dangerous because Ocean have been increasing hash power, and the fact that they're kind of pushing these type of things, given that they lead towards a sense of complacency amongst Bitcoiners, thinking that there's work going towards decentralizing mining when there clearly isn't. Secondly, they're providing like a blueprint with the use of templates for other miners to use in different ways, which could censor transactions also. And you've only got really a handful of entities that are involved in actually picking those templates for the miners to do the mining on. So I think it's really written on the wall for the authorities. here's a great big kind of piece of centralization. Yeah, to the plebs, yep, we're doing decentralization, but not really. And then to the authorities, there's a kind of polarizing set of people, and actual companies, often incorporated in the US or in China, that they now can actually go to and force kind of certain templates being run in the future. And so I see that as very, very problematic. We possibly were kind of complacent ourselves, but there was a kind of just this kind of assumption a few years ago that no Bitcoin miners would really be doing their own templates. I don't think in the way that they're doing now, because it would be so it just be not. It wouldn't follow the incentives economically for folk to do so. There's just this huge belief as an assumption. Well, a miner is just going to pick the most valuable transactions to mine, and they're not going to differentiate between whether this transaction is distasteful or it doesn't fit a certain type. And now this precedent has been set, and now Bitcoin mining companies can operate as a regulated entity on listed on an exchange, having open dialogue with politicians and all that. Like, the game has changed massively, and I don't see a single Bitcoin company out there Bitcoin mining company out there of size that I feel that are going to do a good fight for the neutrality of a Bitcoin miner, and really what they should be doing, which is having no opinion on what they're mining, just doing the work, which is solving the next block hash and appending to the chain.
I like that take, absolutely. And one of the things that all of this threatens to undermine is the regular CoinJoin transactions, especially Whirlpool. And on that topic, just kind of zooming back by another lens here, for people who are maybe listening to this, they're interested in Bitcoin, they don't really understand Whirlpool and things like this. There's an expression on your side of Bitcoin, which is make every transaction a CoinJoin. And I thought maybe you could try to explain this to people. Why is that an important statement? And what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, sure. So it's an important statement because if just to kind of, I'll start with the definition of a CoinJoin, because actually people don't always get it really right. A CoinJoin is just a collaborative transaction, really, and one particularly where you're effectively sharing inputs to a transaction. And so, especially for folk that kind of just want to take a step back and kind of understand what we mean by that, is that when you spend Bitcoin, Bitcoin's got a nuance in the protocol. I've used this kind of phrasing. It uses this kind of comparison before, but it's a bit like when you receive Bitcoin, it's a bit like someone's written a check to you, because they're like bearer instruments, and it's for a kind of a specific amount of money, and then you can take those checks and then you destroy them in a Bitcoin transaction. You write a check to someone else and you write a check back to yourself, and that's really how Bitcoin kind of works. It's like a payment to someone else, often a payment back to you because there's some change left over. And that has this effect of, whilst it's pseudonymous, the chain is pretty readable for outside observers. And a key part of that is the fact that the guy that's making the payment, you can generally assume that all of the kind of those checks, or those paid invoices you can kind of imagine that are being used to pay that transaction in Bitcoin, they're called UTXOs. They are all assumed to be owned by the same person. So if you're doing a CoinJoin, what you're actually doing in Bitcoin is you're not actually doing anything that the protocol doesn't allow, but you're engaging in behavior that is not typical and breaks that observation heuristic that surveillance firms and individuals will use, which is to assume that all those UTXOs that you use for a transaction all come under your ownership. And that might sound a bit abstract, but it really does lead to a lot of interpretation over payments, especially when you're dealing with regulated exchanges or even merchants that know who you are. Once you've kind of engaged in a payment and you make subsequent payments, if you're not coin joining and you're not adding ambiguity to those public transactions that you're doing, you're leaving a really obvious paper trail for people to follow what your next transactions are. And also, kind of, which is probably more of a worry for most people at the moment, as we're in a bit of a bull market, is potentially what other UTXOs you have that could be quite high value, or absolutely worst case, someone could use heuristics to kind of trace their way back to a cluster of transactions or of UTXOs rather, that could actually give a really good indication of what's actually in your wallet. So you can kind of think about this as a bit like, imagine paying for fragments of gold, but then because of the traceability of Bitcoin, someone actually works what the entire balance of of your coin box is. And so that's kind of really something that you want to avoid. And so when I say kind of make every transaction a CoinJoin, is basically about just make every transaction ambiguous to an observer. And that's important because if you're doing something like Whirlpool, you break all links in a single transaction, so people can't see once you've entered into Whirlpool what is happening to transactions afterwards, because of the way that the transaction is broken down into different denominations. But even once you actually have used Whirlpool, even when you're spending, say, to a merchant or something like that, it's great to kind of either construct a transaction yourself that is ambiguous. You don't actually necessarily even need someone else to do that. You can do a transaction in a wallet like Sparrow or Ashigaru that gives you a transaction that looks like a CoinJoin but actually isn't. And that's something the Ashigaru and Sparrow implementations there are completely based off something that Samourai pioneered really as a standard. But of course, the other thing that Samourai did is there's no point, right, in doing a transaction that looks like a CoinJoin if you aren't also potentially able to make that a CoinJoin as well. And so it's something the Ashigaru team provide at the moment, which is a server which actually operates free of charge for the users, but they can actually go and liaise with a user and say, hey, I'm going to spend some money. Can I basically do a CoinJoin with you? So let's say you're spending at a merchant. You can, through no cost, just basically use some of your friends' UTXOs. You can use some of yours. And that means when you actually spend to someone else, when they look at the inputs of your transaction, even if they assume that they're all yours, it would be an incorrect assumption because you've used someone else's. And this is all done in a way which you don't give up custody of your coins, even as that collaborator of that transaction. So that's kind of certainly what kind of I mean. I think a lot of the other folk that have been very influenced by kind of what Samourai have kind of pioneered, that's very much kind of what we mean when we talk about that, because we are just highly aware, especially in this kind of age of surveillance, and in a time when so many people, when they're using Bitcoin, are dealing with like regulated entities. It's a highly surveilled chain. There's been essentially zero privacy capabilities added to the core protocol since the beginning, and in many ways, I'd argue it's got worse. You have to use like applications to at the wallet level type method, at the wallet level for you. Like, you can't rely on the protocol. You got to do that to make your transactions for your own safety and your own privacy.
Now, Max, there's a common genre on social media, common Bitcoin genre, where we have somebody on screen who is a Bitcoiner, usually of the XX chromosomal variety, and they pull out their phone at a shop and they say, hey, look, this shop accepts Bitcoin, and they scan the QR code and it happens instantly and they're on their way. And, people looking at this, they say, oh, yes, they watch this. Bitcoin is the future. Everything's worked out. I should probably also follow her on Instagram for research purposes. What is happening in that sort of genre? What are people not understanding about those sorts of videos? Maybe you could go deeper beneath the layers.
No, absolutely. So I think, yes, there's actually a lot happening in there, and there's a lot of different players pursuing different narratives. So, like, I think one kind of example of that is even at a kind of what's often called Bitcoin's layer 2 with Lightning, there's been a narrative pushed by certain folk that if you use Lightning Safe, then you can achieve this kind of point of sale type experience with Bitcoin. Now, there are actually a number of users, I would say they're a bit more experienced and technical, that do very much believe in Lightning and tell me, no, I can do that and it works very well for me. But certainly in my experience, and it's been a while since I've used Lightning now, but I did used to run a node and have my own Lightning wallet as well. I found kind of using Lightning anything but that experience, even though you can like get an instant payment through, and it, don't get me wrong, it certainly can be used for instant payments, and it's a good tool for that. I do think that its application is going to be limited in terms of the places that you can spend at. to the privacy considerations. There are some advantages, but there's a lot of disadvantages with Lightning as well. And of course, the fact that actually, still to this day, I still believe you kind of have to have the patience of a sysadmin to actually run the infrastructure required on the Lightning side. And even when you are doing Lightning, it is fundamentally not the same as Bitcoin. It looks Bitcoiny. Your denomination's in Bitcoin. You're not giving up custody to anyone, but you've got to remember that when you're doing this whole channel management, you've got a node. You may be using a watchtower or something else. You are not doing a push payment in the same way that that Bitcoin is. It's not like a transaction that you push out and it gets picked up and appended to a database. This is something that actually requires acceptance from other channels, other node operators that are maintaining liquidity. You have to have transactions done with these users, and they can close those channels at any time on you for any reason that they wish. And so, even if you can perform this kind of, on the ground kind of payment, like even with Lightning, which is one of the kind of the most honest layer twos that we'll see, when we're talking about, we'll include de facto layer twos also when we talk about this. It's not kind of as hunky dory as folk would suggest, and there's a good chance that you as a user might kind of feel, hang on, what's happening here? Like, why am I not getting that kind of experience? I think what often happens is people kind of see the exciting technology and then go, well, that's really cool. I'm glad it can be done, but I'm not actually going to run it myself. And then they just use a custodial provider, and then you end up with a kind of situation where it's not really any different to a Visa or a MasterCard. You might not see the censorship or the spyware on that network yet, but if it is all custodial, it will happen. And there are kind of companies, I think Spark is one that has got kind of chain analysis. It is baking into the protocol, into its payment protocols, censorship of users, and they're very much encouraging users to sign on and give like an email and all that, and pay each other with an email and abstract away these kind of ugly invoices of QR codes and addresses that we see in Bitcoin. And for me, there's like a big red flag there, because for me, that really starts it's like history repeating itself with the instant messengers like XMPP, which, yes, you can still use now. You can have like an AIM was one of them, but like an XMPP client. You used to be able to use it with Google Chat. You used to be able to use it, I'm pretty sure, with AOL. It is a federated protocol. But then, once a player, like a large corporate player, gets involved in enough, they give the experience that you're doing, this kind of chat for Lightning. But then it's very easy for them, once they've built that network effect, to then fork changes into code base, bring up the kind of the bridge, and keep you in a kind of closed ecosystem, and people will opt for that when there's the convenience. I think not seen so much of this on Bitcoin Twitter recently, but I'm sure the energy for it hasn't gone. But you are seeing things as well like eCash, which was a great original concept by David Chaum, when it was kind of before credit cards really had kind of made their way into the payments landscape, and could have been a really interesting way to pay with fiat money. But really, for me, eCash is only useful when you're actually already comfortable giving up custody. And so whilst it might have very good privacy properties, it might have good finality, it sure as hell should be a better payment experience than Bitcoin in terms of something that's kind of quick, easy to use, nice and easy. You shouldn't have the same kind of requirement on you to manage your own infrastructure or manage your own keys. When you start marrying custodial methods, and it doesn't matter even if you've got your own keys to these tokens that are eCash, they fundamentally represent Bitcoin that's in custody. Once you've got that and you're expecting privacy in this day and age, basically anything post 9/11, your chance of getting real privacy are not going to happen. And you just got to accept that anyone that's operating any kind of unregulated eCash mint or anything like that, there's a good chance that if they don't walk away with your money, the government will step in and walk away with your money instead, and cite some kind of AML, counterterrorism regulations or whatever for the reason for that. So for me, there's really no substitute on Bitcoin for the main chain. I actually haven't seen any compelling layer 2 or other technology in Bitcoin that I'd be interested in using for faster payments or smaller payments. I've said this before, but I'll use Monero for that. And where possible, I'll use Monero for larger payments as well. I'm very happy to use both those protocols opportunistically and swap between the two. But yeah, I'm kind of still a bit of a believer that this blockchain space won't really scale vertically with kind of lots of layers, but will actually probably scale horizontally. And I think, honestly, the market shows that as well. And I've seen it kind of firsthand in certain countries when fees go up on Bitcoin or the chain gets congested. I've seen people move to other chains such as like Litecoin or even Dogecoin or anything like that. And certainly we're seeing in certain markets, folk moving to Monero already. So yeah, I'd just kind of caution people against that. And I'd also especially caution Americans from getting too taken with the payments opportunities provided by crypto anyway. It's not just in Bitcoin that they do the kind of, oh, here's a fancy payment, nice Instagram influencer showing how quick and easy it's to done. You see this on other chains like, a Ripple, a Stellar, a lot of kind of these fast payment things. And I can tell you now, as a British citizen living in Singapore and having dealt a lot with the British and Singapore banking systems, it's quite possible to have exactly that experience with your bank, and it works a lot better than crypto. It's just if you're an American, you probably haven't really seen that because the banking system is so far behind in the US compared to Europe. So it's kind of one of those areas where kind of, due to like probably state regulations and don't even know the full reasons. For some reason, the US has been significantly further behind on developing, payments technology, and so crypto is a real kind of distraction, I think, for folk that are looking for a kind of more polished experience with payments or getting stuff done cheap or fast.
I came across this recently on Twitter. This guy, for all I know, is a genius. And here's what he says, Max. Now, we're not giving financial advice, obviously. That would be a foolish thing for us to even suggest. But this guy seems to be able to do it. And this is what he says. I'm going to skip the actual word he's saying, but I think we'll get the idea. He says, F your Roth, F your 401k, F your bonds, F your index funds, F your mutual funds. Buy Bitcoin. And if we go into the comments here, somebody says, what about real estate? Big mistake, Max, because he says F real estate too. What are your thoughts on a financial guru such as this gentleman here?
It's really hard to kind of do financial advice, and something like social media is, let's be sympathetic, is actually a terrible medium to provide it. And it's the same reason, actually, if you're giving financial advice to your friends as well, is that even if your friends are the same age, there's a good chance you're in different stages of your life. If your friend's gone through university and you haven't, there's a good chance, you've probably got more savings and you're able to kind of put money away on maybe a deposit for a property or something like that. And it could be that someone's had less luck and someone else has got better luck, or someone's backed up with family money. People's risk tolerances are different as well. People's reaction to losses and gains are different. And so it is actually just very hard to kind of give any kind of straightforward advice on anything, even if you're pretty convinced on its kind of likelihood of going up in fiat value terms to anyone, just because circumstances for every individual is really different. Like what I would say is like, I would say I'm personally, and I still remain pretty bullish on Bitcoin. I'm happy to hold it. I do believe it will probably go up, but I'm constantly kind of derided as like a kind of a bear and seen as really pessimistic because I don't have a target price of if I hit this, I would sell, or it's going to make this price at this point. I actually don't know how people go through their life with some target price and some kind of estimate based off of some weird analysis that they've done. For me, that just seems an incredibly depressing way to live, because surely you wake up every day and you like, oh, can I exit the matrix now? And will I be kind of finally kind of financially free? My advice is just get a fucking job or start your own business, right? Live within your means. The money you have, I really would recommend, like, I don't like real estate as an investment much. Certainly depends on the jurisdiction you're in, but like you can kind of get burned pretty high with kind of poor tenants if you're renting it out. I'll be the first to admit I've kind of suffered a little with that. Still can manage it. But whilst I am bullish on Bitcoin, like I don't think it's unreasonable to sell, and reallocate. I mean, I don't tend to use this portfolio kind of terminology, but like let's say for example, you've got a wife, you've got kids, and you don't own your home, and you're at the mercy of a landlord yourself, and you've got a really high Bitcoin stack. I think it's a good idea to sell some and get ownership of the property. Sure, yep, the government can seize it. We all know that, but don't tell me that you don't have more ownership over your property when you own it versus than when you're renting. I think for your own sanity, it's worth holding assets that don't have the volatility of Bitcoin, especially the older you get and when you've got more responsibilities. But I think also you should, be courageous enough to certainly put money on the line with Bitcoin and buy some. There's nothing wrong with that, and I also think that there's nothing wrong with taking a punt. Certainly I wouldn't advise borrowing money and leveraging. I don't think that this kind of number's going to go up infinitely, and I wouldn't rely on it. But I don't even really like this whole idea of taking a proportion and saving a bit every month. Like, if you think it's oversold, if you think there's a good reason to be bullish, take a chunk of money, put the money in, and trade with some conviction, preferably doing some kind of cash trade. That's worked out well for me. Yeah, sure, you don't expect to necessarily pick the bottom, and kind of get it absolutely right, but have the courage of convictions. DCAing Bitcoin doesn't mean you're not trading. You're just trading with, fewer potential gains because you're kind of smoothing it out. If you've got a belief and you've got some kind of spare cash, do it. But I still would advise holding other assets. Just be very kind of skeptical of folk giving that advice. I feel very blessed. I've done well out of Bitcoin, not only from just kind of what I've held, but having now kind of got understood it. I've been able to get jobs related to it, which I feel like I've done well for, and I'm very grateful for that. But just that there is no real shortcut, and I think everyone has to be aware of, like, no matter kind of how crazy you see the government is with printing money and all that. I think it's a very reasonable assumption to make that we're not going to see the same kind of multiples of gains that some of the early adopters had. That's not saying that you missed the boat or anything like that, but just, probably don't expect 100x on your investment anytime soon. And if you get 2 or 3x, that's great. And that's great. And if you want 100x, go find a small company like a startup or something like that. And I've certainly done that, even when I was also investing, so to speak, in Bitcoin. And a lot of those startups went to zero, and a few have done very, very well and have kind of given similar returns to holding Bitcoin. So it's certainly like not the only thing. Just like with any investment, you do your research and just appreciate that even the best research things and the best team and all that, this you can never obviously predict all the circumstances. Businesses can time things wrong. They can have the perfect product, and bad luck or accidents or whatever can kind of turn an investment south very quickly. But definitely diversify, live within your means, and take risks. The younger you are, the better.
I find your sanity disturbing, Max, but we can continue on. One more explicitly in Bitcoin question for you. Your brief thoughts on the company Ledger and their product, the most popular hardware wallet, the Ledger Wallet. What are your thoughts on that?
I still will never really forgive Ledger for the way that they handled customer information. Not just that they lost it and had it in the hands of people that I still get. Yes, I'm on the mailing list for, and I get spammed for emails, asking me to kind of download this and enter my seed words into that. But there's also their reaction where I found them very defensive about it. So I've never really been very happy with Ledger. I would say, though, is Ledger have got a good team in terms of the product that they built. Their hardware has been very, very good. I actually, I've used the, is it the Nano? I can't remember which letter. I think it was Nano S or something. So it's actually a great little wallet. It was a good piece of hardware for its time. It wasn't fully open source, but there was a secure element, and there'd been a lot of care taken in making sure it was a good product. It was affordable. It got a lot of reach. It had pretty terrible privacy considerations, especially when used with their default software, which I wasn't happy about, but you can certainly use with other open source open source software, to kind of to get around that as an issue. So like it's hard to kind of knock them entirely because they have been like an important part of the ecosystem, and they definitely have helped folks secure wallets and were influential in that early kind of hardware wallet design. Certainly some kind of boo-boos that they've made since. About a couple of years ago, there's a bit of a social media storm there on the uh, and them using like a pretty unsophisticated Shamir sharing scheme to kind of split your seed amongst other parties. That was ill-fated, and it was quite encouraging for me to see them getting called out with that. I think really like it's pretty disappointing to see their latest move with pushing users off those old hardware wallets onto new ones and trying to push that way. I just think, unfortunately, you can't expect them to operate like even like an Apple or someone like that keeps hardware supported for kind of more years like that. And I think they're probably under a lot of pressure for returns. It's a bit disappointing. They've got an enterprise business as well, so they could be making money off that. So it is a bit disappointing to see them kind of, I would say, kind of not market the new product in the most honest way and try and get people to almost feel that their old kind of wallets aren't good enough. But what I can say though is that I'm kind of happy at least that they're kind of probably providing a bit of FUD on their old product, because if people do make a choice now, there is a chance now that they could pick a new product entirely. And if someone is going to kind of use a hardware wallet, and they are only really interested in handling Bitcoin, like the Foundation Passport. There's a new one as well. I think it's called the Prime or something. I haven't used that, but my Passport I still use and find excellent. Or people just realize, I can just use this wallet on my phone and it'll be absolutely fine. But yeah, like unfortunately, people, I think some people are still going to need the hardware wallet as a bit of a crutch, for them to kind of handle seed phrases correctly, because too many people do stupid stuff with their online wallets. But yeah, it's not a company I've got an awful lot of love for, that's for sure.
Side question here. We don't have to go too much into this, but I do value your insight as a knowledgeable Bitcoin person. So here, I'll just read an exchange on Twitter. This gentleman is responding to some tweet. He says, Lightning is better in every way. Not sure why we are pushing some crappy alt. And Amir Taaki responds and says, STFU, I want to punch your laser-eyed faggot face. Lightning is transparent docs Fedware. Fight me, BITCH. And Jameson Lopp says, in response to Amir Taaki, seek professional help. It got me thinking, Max, let's assume boxing is the sport.
Yeah.
Who do you have, Amir Taaki or Jameson Lopp?
Well, it's going to be like, if I was watching that fight, it'd be a bit like, I suppose for me, if it was boxing, it'd be a bit like watching, I'm thinking of like old British boxers now. So I'd be, oh, bloody hell, what's the one with the lisp that's really annoying? It's probably out of your generation. But anyway, like basically, I'd be like fully on Amir's side. There is just like, I don't like the fight he's having there. Like, I don't want my fighter to fight in that way. It's a really ineffective way of making the argument. It's not convincing. It comes across as unhinged. But yeah, I'm fully in his camp. In terms of kind of the actual use. The seek professional help, it's just an annoying comment, and it's kind of moral high ground nonsense. And there's actually a really kind of serious discussion to be had there, which is that Lightning isn't really good for transacting, especially in kind of ways that demand privacy, and especially in ways that give sovereignty to the user. And it's very silly to kind of even characterize something like Monero as an alt. Because generally, it's not a strict term, but generally the agreed term for an altcoin was, they were used to describe all the things that were just like, copy and paste from Bitcoin, right? Like, another Litecoin, change the amount printed, shorten the block time. Altcoin, different name, different brand, let's pump this. Whereas, Monero is a completely different technology. It's had an incredibly sophisticated core development team that even on that original crypto note technology have added like ring CT. They've added Oh God, like it's been a while since I've even talked about this, but there's been a new address scheme. There's going to be the full chain membership proofs coming up. There's another really kind of key one I should be remembering. I remember I actually even used Monero before they had Ring CT on, and it was an interesting enough chain back then. But yeah, I mean, like it's just not like silly to even kind of talk about it as an alt. It's a very good kind of project. It's a very useful cryptocurrency in its own right, and really, Bitcoin users should enjoy using something like Monero when they use Bitcoin because it's got a similar, it's a similar look and feel. You've got UTXOs, you've got a push way of doing transactions. You have, a thick client there that interacts with a node that only uses the node for getting an idea of a balance, and you can do like offline transactions and all that. The average Bitcoiner should be comfortable on main chain, and then they should find other main chain protocols fun and enjoyable to use. For me anyway, like using lightning feels very different to using Bitcoin. There are definitely kind of a couple of use cases I can think that lightning has its advantages for, but it's just not a Bitcoin type payment system at all. It is very different. It's innovative. I think it was solving a problem that wasn't really the case, or wasn't really needed to be solved in Bitcoin. But it is an interesting piece of tech, and it can be used. But yeah, it certainly is kind of like there's a good reason why, like obviously as has often been made the case now, but was really kind of at the time something like TDev of Samourai had made a lot a few years ago. But there's a reason why like the Monero was picked up in the darknet markets, and it wasn't something like Lightning that was.
You took that very seriously, but I was, I was thinking of a boxing match, and I assume, Max, that tweet by that response by Amir Taaki, that may have been mid workout for all I know during a creatine spike, so we can forgive him for that. But
Jameson did do a bunch of weight loss. I do remember that, and he kind of called it like I remember reacting to this. I'll have to find the tweet again, but he called it some kind of like biohack, and like he had all this technical term for it, and wrote a big blog post. And it did amuse me because I mean, he lost some weight and he looked a lot better, but I mean, it literally just stopped eating carbs and sugar and shit, and that was it. I mean, like don't need to overcomplicate it, mate. Just you ate meat, eggs, and vegetables for a bit. Like that was it. So it is kind of funny. Like I don't know, Jameson Lopp's kind of he's an all right follow on Twitter and all that, and obviously he's been in the space for a while. But like some of these guys do take themselves a bit seriously.
just get you out on a couple cultural questions. It is July 4th, not exactly the highest moment when one is thinking of British achievements, but it got me thinking, what are you most proud of as an Englishman?
I think one of the things I like about being British, and it's especially true during stuff like Independence Day or the American Revolution, as I tend to think of it, is that something that some Americans don't, I think, really get about the Brits is that and it takes you back. I remember in Florida, like 20 years ago, I had a lovely girl come up to me, seeing me as I'm kind of standing awkwardly on the beach while there's a whole bunch of fireworks going off, wondering kind of what I was doing at an Independence Day celebration. Say to me, "Oh, when's your Independence Day?" And having no idea about like what it meant and all that, right? But I was kind of thinking to myself, like one of the things I'm kind of proud about being British is that I think, and again, like this is probably more old fashioned, and yeah, certainly the UK's changed, much like the US has culturally. We've been watered down, but at least for me, kind of, one of the things I like about being British is that we don't need to remind ourselves about it. I feel we don't need to fly a flag. We don't need to kind of go out and feel that we're the biggest or the best or anything like that. There's just that deep-seated knowledge that we are who we are and we operate the way we do. I think the history and the culture kind of does weigh on you heavily. Like generations kind of go back. We know the history, and I think it is kind of still kind of a kind of deep culture, and like there's a no nonsense aspect to it as well. I find that I can kind of take the piss out of my mates in a way that's a lot easier. And I was actually in Denmark a couple of weeks ago for work, and it's funny actually dealing with the Danes that are kind of quite blunt talking and very dry humor, and actually seeing as a Brit how much kind of we've got in common with them. Whereas there are those aspects in American culture But let's say, for example, you're with Californians, it certainly does feel a lot more foreign to our culture compared to say like a native Dane, even though that they don't share the same language. So yeah, I like the fact that kind of we don't need to really reassert ourselves, and I think the average Brit like knows what they stand for. Certainly, kind of the old-fashioned ones, the ones that have run their own businesses, know their towns and all that. They don't feel the need to market themselves. They don't need to feel to advertise. Another funny thing as well is that I like the kind of, there is a British understatement, like the Brits don't know how good they've got some things as well. I mean, certainly it's very fashionable now to kind of look at the state of London and be like, oh my God, like what a shithole, or that's gone wrong here. And I still do love London for all its flaws, but at the same time, Britain isn't just London. You go out. I was up in Newcastle, and there's like beaches there that should be on Instagram. There I was like having like this in a shack, having like fish, and it wasn't even fish and chips, actually a proper meal with fish on a beach, and then go out in the countryside afterwards. And there is like great architecture. There is a small town culture there, and people don't boast about it, but it's still for me, it's still a great country to live in. And you still you can go into a small town, and whether you go to shops or you kind of go to it, you get that kind of friendly humor and that slight kind of irreverence that I think we certainly need to bring more into the kind of the forefront of the political culture, but does certainly exist in your average interaction.
This reminds me of a video that I sent you, a guy named Terry Eagleton. He's talking about how at Oxford he was going through all of the theses and looking for the most pedantic one. And he says, the one that I found was some aspects of the vaginal system of the flea. And he says, there's something very English modesty about this, right? Nothing brash, nothing too overreaching. Save something for posterity. All right, Max, really appreciate your time here. And I'm going to give you the final thoughts, whether that's on Bitcoin, Britain, the state of the world, any places you'd like people to track down.
I'll go back to kind of the start of what we kind of spoke about with kind of Samourai and obviously the kind of the resurgence of Whirlpool. It's kind of tough to know where to stand on some of these things. As we kind of talked about with knots and core, there is a lot of tribalism in the space. And I also think it's kind of funny, something we didn't get a chance to speak about, but like, the new Whirlpool implementation was not without its controversy. There were kind of criticisms from some folk and all that. And I would just kind of say is that like there is a bit of an opportunity here. I think if you're particularly kind of if you're a listener here and if you're listening to me, there's probably a good chance that you've been using Samourai Tech, or me from the Telegram channel for Sparrow or something like that. And so you'll probably be kind of immediately sympathetic to kind of, bring back a Whirlpool and all that. But I think, there is an opportunity here to kind of like step back a bit from the tribalism. I think I'm in an interesting position where I don't feel particularly tribal towards core or knots. And I think you can look at like a new implementation and appreciate that there might be some kind of issues with it, but take it carefully. But actually, I think that the takeaway here is that you should be optimistic as a kind of a sovereign individual user of Bitcoin here. There has been pushback now against the authorities. Software has been released. There has been a form of activism here done by that team. I wouldn't say expect perfection, expect some mistakes. It's a new, from all it would appear to be a new team. But at the same time, at least from my perspective, my intention is to support that. Mix my coins, put my money in, and make sure that the Samourai guys are kind of supported in their court case, which is now a form of activism. And I think that everyone else here has got to put their money where their mouth is and make sure that when they actually transact, they're using those tools, they're coin joining, and they're doing that, because every one of those transactions that you make that aren't kind of falling into a kind of a compliant form of Bitcoin are a form of activism, and they're a form of kind of as an everyday assertion of your own rights and sovereignty on that. And so really that's kind of what I would take. Don't dive into fanboyism if you can help. Look upon with amusement when some of those critics are clearly criticizing this software because it feels, it's just basically Samourai when it clearly isn't. But at the same time, obviously don't just assume that everything's going to be done in the same way as Samourai did, because those guys were the ones that innovate and create this stuff in the first place, and you've got someone else now clearly like inheriting and working that new technology out. So approach with caution. I think enjoy the win. Like, it's great to see this kind of come back, and make sure you support and spread the word. And here's to the next few months. And I am a bit more optimistic than I was, but yeah, I think it's important all of us to kind of just fight back in our own little way.
Hey, thanks for listening. I could really use your help real quick. If you could share this episode with someone, engage with me, leave a review anywhere. This helps me to break the technocratic shadow banning that is happening with my brand. And of course, if you really want to escape the technocracy, go to escapethetechnocracy.com. Privacy tutorial series, books, newsletters, consulting, and of course, you can leave a donation. Thank you very much.